Putin Bad News Putin is using food as leverage in his game of chicken. After a year of blocking grain exports from Ukraine, which was contributing to a famine in Africa and the Middle East, Russian President Vladimir Putin finally agreed to lift the blockade just as I arrived in this historic port city a year ago. Russian forces attacked Odessa's port facilities the day after the two sides signed the UN-brokered pact, seemingly as a warning that, "Don't think this deal protects you." Exactly 1 year later, as Russia withdrew from the agreement and once again threatened world food supplies, I found myself again in Odessa. Putin is engaging in food blackmail by pressuring the West to ease sanctions against Russian banks so that grain from Ukraine can once again flow freely. Canada has dubbed Russia's ongoing blockade the weaponization of hunger. As I stated then and reiterate now, Putin's contempt for the grain deal indicates that any Western politicians who still harbor delusions about talking with him to cease his assault on Ukraine are fools. Putin's hunger games continue, and this time he's armed them with missiles. Most sunflower oil storage facilities and some grain silos were damaged in Tuesday's loud bombardment with drones and cruise missiles. This strike was the worst on Odessa since the war began. Flak from the downed missiles hit a civilian building close to my interpreter's home. On Wednesday evening, locals were urged to brace themselves for more missile attacks. Russia said the attacks were retaliation for an attack by Ukrainian sea drones on the Kerch Bridge on Monday, which connects Russia to the annexed Crimean Peninsula. Try not to doubt me. Putin has two goals with his messages. First, he is prepared to starve poor nations if the world does not pay his price. Second, he is prepared to demolish Odessa if he is not given the authority to do so, regardless of the consequences for a world desperately in need of grain. For a long time, Putin's obsession with Odessa stemmed from the fact that it was founded in the late 18th century by Russian Empress Catherine the Great, one of his inspirations. However, the largest city in Ukraine was never populated by Russians. Its lengthy history as an important port contributed to a culturally rich population that includes Spanish harbor builders, French aristocrats, and people from all over the world. About 30% of Odessans were Jews before World War II. As a result of Moscow's unlawful destruction of the Novokakhovka Dam on the Dnipro River, it is being overrun by refugees fleeing Russian attacks on cities and towns in the region's east. I wandered the streets on the day the grain deal fell through and realized that the city, despite its damage, still had its own unique character. Parents and kids still enjoy ice cream at the city park's kiddie pool, while trend-setting teenagers and retirees people watch from nearby benches. Strangely enough, the city is very quiet. The visitors have left, and many locals have also left. The city of Odessa is an important port. If the Russian blockade is not lifted, neither the country nor its farmers can survive, let alone continue growing their world-famous grains and sunflowers. Ukraine's economy would be severely damaged, and it will be effectively cut off from the sea. Russian naval forces in the Black Sea have effectively seized control of the southern Black Sea and the adjacent Sea of Azov, preventing Ukrainian exports of grain and other vital commodities. Russia's militarization of the Black Sea violates international law and threatens the security of the 7 nations that border it, including NATO members Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria. It's incredible that NATO members like the United States have let Russia get away with this. Xi Jinping of China, who is attempting to do the same thing in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits, is keeping a careful eye. He is holding his breath in anticipation of whether or not the West and the United Nations would give in to Putin's food blackmail and relax sanctions in order to revive the grain deal. I asked Alexei Goncharenko, a member of the Ukrainian parliament from Odessa, his thoughts on how NATO members should respond to Russia's activities as we strolled along a seawall overlooking the Black Sea. He gazed out into the distance at the harbor, which was under attack, and reacted angrily. He exclaimed angrily, "Why did the free world let this happen?" After noting that Moscow had effectively militarized the Black Sea by turning Crimea into an armed dagger pointing at Ukraine after seizing the peninsula in 2014. Turkey, a member of NATO and a co-sponsor of the grain deal, is of the opinion of Goncharenko, who thinks that armed escorts should be provided for grain ships. The Montreux Convention of 1936, which regulates shipping between the Mediterranean and Black Seas, and prohibits most warships from passing, should ideally be amended to allow an exception for Istanbul. That way, other NATO countries outside Turkey may help defend the grain ships from a possible Russian strike. To assault ships flying the flags of Turkey, the United Kingdom, and the United States, why doesn't the free world tell Putin to, just try? Asked Goncharenko. This reluctance on the part of NATO is visible to Putin. Then why is he restricted from employing the same tactics in the Baltic? Is she unable to take the same action in the South China Sea? Goncharenko is on the right track with his inquiries. At the recent NATO conference in Vilnius, Lithuania, he attempted to bring up the convoy issue, but was met with resistance from political authorities from NATO countries. It would appear that everyone is holding their breath until Putin's August visit to Ankara, in the hopes that Turkey can convince him to rejoin the pact. To put an end to Putin's Hunger Games, I think additional pressure from the West is needed, especially in the United Nations General Assembly. It's possible that only armed escorts from NATO can protect grain convoys. We shall all pay a much higher price than the rising cost of grain if the West bows in to Putin's food blackmail.